try and be as swift as possible. So this project is actually an industry-focused research project in a preliminary phase. So it's a very preliminary findings. We had some initial funding, and we're about to start the main part of the project. There's quite a lot of partners involved. There are a lot of paper contributors, but there are, in the authoring of this paper, but there are many more industry partners, including it's a Swiss-based one, so the University of Applied Science and Arts in Lucerne, Fraunhofer Institute, the EC3 Education Committee, and the Swiss Association of General Contractors. I'm going to go a little quickly through the preliminary things because I think for most of you it's known, we've got a very large and significant European construction sector with massive potential savings through digitalization as identified by the EU BIM handbook and other sources. But we also have a lot of challenges around carbon emissions, waste, but particularly about the lack of digitalization and finding appropriately skilled people. So the focus of this work is really about defining a competency profile or competency framework. How do we define digital skills? The underlying question is how are we planning, building and operating built assets in the future, right? This is something that's changing so quickly, and as we've seen evidenced from the papers shown at this conference, it's a dynamic environment. So the proposal here, as I said, is an industry-led, so there's a commercial company in the background as well as research and other associations. Behind it, it's looking to create a platform that'll be used. Essentially, there's 3 tasks that have to be identified. We need to know how do we define the processes for new digital ways of working. 2, what are the competencies associated to those processes? And then how can we create custom profiles? So these are the 3 things that I want to present to you. How do we define the processes? What are the competencies? And how can we create a new role about that? So 1, defining processes. So in the past, we have a lot of standards. We have a current practice that is sort of looking at the past, and we create a standard, a prescriptive standard for how work needs to be delivered. And what we're proposing here is a bottom-up approach. So the industry is defining how we will be working, and we need to document these processes as they develop. And we're looking to create a knowledge base, so an evolving knowledge base of new practices as they're being developed. One of the mechanisms for doing that is the IDM standard, ISO 29481, which is also part of the Building Smart use case management platform, which is essentially it's an open, freely available resource where companies and trade associations define their use cases. So there's a huge range of use cases, from cost estimation, from occupational health and safety requirements, and these are documented by different associations. So, and this is becoming a machine-readable way of defining processes. So this is an example of how processes could be documented with a standard, and then how do we extract competencies from these processes. So this is a work in progress, and I want to share a couple of ideas. Essentially, we'll be creating profiles. So these are custom profiles. We want to get away from something like a BIM manager or an information manager. We want associations or companies to be able to define profiles as they need. And essentially, a profile is a accumulation of use cases. So they define what has to be done. So we have let's say a cost estimation, quality control, and each of these use cases has a series of tasks that are defined. This is actually, if I go back, this standard, the IDM, defines one use case and tasks and actors per phase. So initially we're drawing on the IDM standard. And then from those tasks, we can extrapolate competencies, so knowledge, skills, behaviour, experience, education related to those tasks. So that's the core concept. There are contexts related to that. So a cost estimation in China is not the same as a cost estimation in the UK. A cost is also on the project phase. A cost estimation in early phase is different to a late phase. And the project type will also have an implication on the skills required. So it's not enough just to say I need a cost estimator. You have to talk about the context of that project type, project phase, region, as an example. And then there are other peripherals, I call them, requirements that may be just set by a potential employer. They say we have specific requirements for software or specific requirements for local codes or whatever they may be. So putting this together, I'm going to show a very simplified version of the competency framework. If we, it's probably, unfortunately, you can't read that. Down the left, we have use cases like design modeling, clash detection, issue management, energy simulation, just as examples. The one highlighted is cost estimation, and then a whole series of parameters. So what are the actors associated to that? What are the tasks? What are the knowledge? What are the skills? And the project is going to be populating this competency framework from multiple resources, from this use case management platform, from job descriptions, from competency standards, from CVs. I'll go into the data sources later. This is obviously a simplification. It's actually a three-dimensional competency framework that has a series of concepts. This is an example for clash detection use case that we will build sort of relationships between different concepts within that. So that can be actors, it can be building elements, it can be educational concepts. And our proposal, I have to just check my time, our proposal is essentially follows these stages. So we are identifying in the initial phase around 5,000 different data sources, so competency statements, job descriptions, curricula, I'll come to them in a second. We'll be extracting and identifying concepts and then mapping these concepts, which I sort of showed preliminary in the previous slide. And this will create our competency framework. We already have a preliminary competency framework, but this will be extracted using, among other things, NLP. And then it will be populated with these 5,000 data sets in the first phase to create a knowledge base, and then from this knowledge base we can start to create profiles as required. We're focusing just in this preliminary phase just on 10 use cases. So that's probably the sort of the core of the research path. I'm going to talk a little bit about the data sources now. We have sort of high volume data sources and high value. So individual CVs are high volume, but we found that they have very little value. Job descriptions at the sort of top right of that diagram there have actually really good content and a pretty high volume. And then we have probably the highest quality competency standards. I'm sorry you can't read these slides. That's an extract from Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors quantity surveyor sort of competency standard. So this is a really high quality standard, essentially a national standard, but obviously you have a very limited volume of those. So we're looking at high volume, high quality, low quality documents. So our main focus will be about job descriptions, use cases, competency standards, and education curricula. So the functionality of this platform, as I said, it has a sort of a commercial focus. Essentially, a company will or an association can define a profile. So it may be, for example, in Switzerland, that the Swiss Engineer and Architects Association wants to say, what is a digital enabled architect, or what is an information manager, and they can build that, or a company for a specific role can build a profile based on these use cases. And then there's a mechanism for assessment, so people can, candidates, for example, can do an assessment, and then it sort of shows, it's essentially a matching of how, what's their percentage, what's their sort of a suitability to this position. There are a lot of use cases for this. Obviously, one of the main use cases for the commercial industry partner is recruiting and providing experts. So that's their business at the moment, is that a company says, we have a job and we need an expert for 12 months or whatever, and then they can define very specifically what that job could be, what that person could be, and then match that. It's also used for internal, for large companies that have a specific job, and then they can assess their existing staff, which person is best suited for this job. It would also be for, as I said over here on the right, for associations to make maybe national definitions of profiles, but also for developing curricula. This is one of the things that we're looking at, is that also because I work in a university, so so how could you define, we want to define a new course, and we base that around defining a profile. So we set the competencies around that profile and then the learning objectives. So it has a huge range of applications, and so upskilling, so people can say where they're lacking skills, recruitment, and training and education. Good, so that's actually the presentation. So as I said, this is a very preliminary stage. If people are interested, they can definitely reach out to me, and I'm happy to take some questions. Thank you.